Hi everybody. The first few lectures that we're going to be going over, where you can have a chance to view these on your own, are going to relate to the Bryk book, which is Organizing Schools in Chicago. As I stated before, I think this is an important book for you to see, for you to experience, and for you to read, especially if you're interested in school improvement and school reform. From an organizational theory perspective, this is arguably one of the top books on the market, and one that I think would benefit you as students to give you a perspective on what organizational theory looks like in schools. I'm going to cover what I think is important in the book and things that I think can help you in your professional practice and in your research as well. So this book, why we cover it, why we talk about it, why we go over it, it really is one of the most important works in organizational theory and in education. If you look at some of the more prolific books that have come out over the last 40 or 50 years in education, this is one of the books. In Anthony Bryk is somebody who you're going to hear that name throughout your entire doctoral program, throughout your professional career. And some of the work that was done on school improvement and community building is really, really, really significant that could impact your way that you practice as well. It's been published, republished, referenced, it's been updated. It's one of these studies that really has been prolific and important in education, and I want you to see kind of how the study worked, what the importance of it was, and how they were able to get all the data that they were able to get. You need to know going into this that this was a commissioned study. You're going to look at this book and you're going to say, how on earth did they get so many people to admit to problems, give them data that you wouldn't normally see? Well, this was a commissioned study. It's an advantage, that's a tremendous advantage of this, but you need to know this going into this, because the odds and likelihood of any of us, myself included, any of my colleagues included, being able to do research like this, it's very, very, very unlikely that it's going to happen, at least at this point in my career or in all of our careers as well. But I want you to know that if you can have a name in the field, kind of what we've already talked about Bryk and Spillane and Ingersoll, you can do this kind of work, but you have to have a name in order to do this kind of work, and that is a big, big, big idea here. So I'm not going to cover the introduction and the preface of this book. I don't think that matters. I don't think that's important, but what I do think is that you see this and you think about this in the context in relation to your school and your own school environment. You can look at this on your own. It kind of gives you the background of the organization of Chicago, what it looks like, what decentralization looks like there. Your districts and your organizations are all different. You're going to see some elements that are similar. I'm guessing you're going to see a lot of elements that are different. So I really would prefer to focus on the methods that were used and the findings, because that's going to help you with the final paper that you're going to be writing in this class. So the schools in this study were naturally organized. We're going to be talking about what organization means. How does organization occur in organizations? How does organization occur in schools? Well, these were organized communities that were segregated, but they were not purposefully segregated. So segregation doesn't exist, but it does exist. Because when you're looking at these large urban districts and these large urban models, you'll find that all of the rich people want to live together and be rich together, and all of the poor people end up being left out and end up living together just based on de facto segregation. And think about this in looking at this in basic theory form. If you were poor and you came into money, would you stay with the poor people or would you move to where the rich people are? So segregation happened without segregation being the point. You have to know that. And this is important when you're thinking about building community partnerships, and especially if you're working in a large urban district, because in those districts, you might be assigned to be a building principal at a school that that might be lower performing and not have the population that you expected to work with, but it just kind of happened that that's how the population organized itself, and that's what you're going to be working with. So I want you to know that, but I want you to see that they're going to say that there wasn't segregation, but really there was segregation. It wasn't purposeful, it just occurred. It was natural segregation, and that happens in all of our urban school systems. And I want you to know that, that the response rate for this study were maddening. You're not going to see studies with this high of a response rate. 70% of teachers openly responded to this, and 99% of principals responded. When I'm conducting a study, my goal is 50% plus one. If I can get 50% plus one of responses, I feel like I've hit the lottery. 99% is maddening. You're not going to see this. You're not going to see this on your dissertation unless you're doing, a case study with 3 or 4 principals. Then, well, I would hope you would get 100% because it's kind of hard to do a case study without getting responses from everybody. I think this gives the data, it gives it depth, it gives it meaning, and it gives it relevancy, and it's why we're still talking about this study 30 years later. So please know that going into this as you look at this book and you think about the way that this study was laid out. So one of the things that I want you to know are kind of the limitations and the biases that happen with this type of response rate. When studies are funded and administrators and teachers are encouraged to participate, that can create kind of a halo in leniency effect where individuals are going to give you the answers that you want to hear because they've been conditioned to respond that way. They know why you're there. They know why you're interviewing them. They know why you're talking to them, and that can cause some issues as well. That is definitely a limitation that has to be looked at here. You're going to put that in your methods section, but it's something that you might not openly discuss when you're trying to convey your work to other researchers. The other thing that I always question about this is sort of the fudging of results. Sure, there's confidentiality. Sure, we're looking at 80 plus principles. But if we're stratifying these principles by lower socioeconomic status and higher socioeconomic status, somebody who was in the district, was in the organization, is going to be able to look at this and say, that's principle A, that's principle B, that's principle C. So the quantitative data, yeah, that's kind of difficult to fudge, but qualitative data, you're going to naturally want to defend why you made the choices that you made and why you did what you did. So that is a limitation of this, and I do want you to keep that in mind. So the first chapter really looks at outcome indicators in terms of attendance. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methods used and some of the data analysis that was presented in this chapter. So 3 indicators were used throughout this entire study. Anytime that you do any high-scale research studies, you have to get in your head going into it that the indicators that they're going to use universally are going to be reading and mathematics. It's just the way that it is. This is what happens. This is the way that it's supposed to be. It's consistent from state to state to state. I come from a state where we implemented standardized testing in science, and we started it in 4th grade, and now I'm in a state where we're doing standardized testing in history. You're not going to see that back where I'm from, and we're not going to see as heavily of an influence in science in this state. So organizationally, I know that no matter where I go to, we can consistently look at math throughout all of the 50 states, and we can consistently look at reading throughout all the 50 states as well. Attendance is unique because there have been many separate studies on student attendance, but you can link student attendance to anything. You can obviously link it to performance. You can link it to student engagement as well. You can link it to transportation. You can link it to facilities management. So I like the fact that Bryk and Company actually used attendance as an indicator. You don't see that often. That's pretty cool when you're looking at it. So what you need to know about correlation is that there's a positive correlation with school attendance and school performance. Children perform better when they are in school. That is a 1,000,000% no-brainer. you'll see more of a positive correlation at the elementary levels than you will at the high school levels, because as we all know from our experience in schools, students can kind of be there in high school without actually being there. But in elementary school, the chances are they're going to be engaged more, they're going to be more actively learning, so the attendance is going to be more positively correlated with school performance. It's difficult to prove because tracking attendance causes even more difficulties, especially when you're looking at these large urban school districts, because one day student can be in school A, then parents lose their home or they lose their source of income, so then they stay in the district but they're moved across town somewhere different. So tracking attendance can also be difficult. So that's definitely a factor that you need to keep in mind and consider here. So attendance was important historically in Chicago in the 1980s. This was one of the big things that locally that people were supposed to do. They weren't worried about it so much at the district level, but principals and teachers were held accountable for attendance. So attendance didn't really improve until the schools decentralized and until that accountability factor was placed on both the teachers and the principals. So how do you improve attendance? Well, you know, I would argue that you improve attendance by hiring good teachers. You want to create an environment where people want to go to school, where they're happy to learn and they're excited to be there. But truthfully, that's, you know, me being in Mickey Mouse Disneyland, that's not the way to improve school attendance. The easiest way to improve school attendance is to enroll better students. If you enroll people that are coming from higher socioeconomic backgrounds where their parents are educated, the children are naturally going to go to school because there's an accountability piece that's left at home. Why this matters, I think, is because Bryk looked at the top quartile of attendance and the bottom quartile and adjusted attendance. So when you're looking at this study and you're looking at how attendance was tracked, it was tracked in 4 quartiles. I'm encouraging you to pay attention to the bottom one more than anything else, because that's where you're going to see improvement and where you're going to see natural-based school reform. So math and reading was done using the Iowa tests of basic skills in grades 3 through 8. So that's good. We're looking at grades where children are more likely to be engaged, and with my experience in elementary schools and early childhood ed, you know that student engagement is higher in the lower grades. Think back to, if you remember what the Iowa test of basic skills were. They were a nationally norm-recognized test that tested on basic skills in math and reading. It's important to know that because you're looking and you're comparing performance in Chicago, Illinois to all over the 50 states versus, you know, what we look at the state level when we have different state-designed and state-appointed tests. This is a good way to know where your school is ranked nationally. So as indicators, these are great indicators. We're going to look at some of the statistics and the academic productivity profile that looks at each school, and I would encourage you to do that on your own. You don't have to have a knowledge of analytic statistics to do this. You'll be fine with basic descriptive statistics and an understanding of Roche analysis, because you're looking at item difficulties and test scales and how they basically correlate with each other. So I think that's important as well. Any schools improving should show learning gains at the end of the study. You should be able to track learning from when the study started to when the study ended. And in theory, an improving school should show greater learning gains at the end, because you're going to have an intervention. You're going to work with the principal, you're going to work with the community, you're going to work with the teachers, you're going to work with the parents, and you're going to improve the school, and you're going to improve the way that students think, students learn, how teachers teach, and how principals manage. So the learning gains will take time, and they're going to occur at the end of the study. So one of the things that you need to know going into this is, while we're going to be looking at specific data points, there's no guarantee with those specific data points. We're going to focus on longitudinal changes more than anything else. So real quick, a few preliminary responses. When we compared the schools, the first ones that they look at, reading gains were 8% greater in the ones that really worked on this improvement model, and math gains were 20% greater. If you can improve math by 20%, you're looking at an extra year and a half in mathematics improvement. Reading improvement benefits every other subject. Math, I like, because you can isolate math. Do you need to be a strong reader in order to be a good mathematician? It helps, but it's not necessarily a direct correlation, which I think matters and is important. Your ability to read is going to help you in every other subject area. In math, not so much. So you really can show, if you can show a gain in mathematical improvement, that's something that can be measured and it can be basically treated independently, which I think is important. So really, we're going to be looking at institutional effectiveness because these were localized schools more than anything else. We're going to look at different contexts from specific buildings and from the district as well, and we're going to talk about that throughout the chapter. So this is an overview basically of what we're trying to do, and why I think this study matters, why I think it's important, and why I'm covering it in this class. I think the next chapter really looks at research, future research ideas, trends in research, and it gives you a framework. So I'm going to present that more in a methodological way, just so you can see how to write a solid framework and an understandable framework. So thank you very much.